they're going to be here, but I just want to make room. Everybody ready? Good morning. I brought a child's prop for purposes of today. I think everybody's seen something like this. It's basically a form of a pendulum. Each side allows the other to go an equal distance away from the center point. Same thing with the First Amendment. Each side must allow the other side content-neutral breath. Because if we take that breath out of the room, even because somebody's president or somebody's on the school board or somebody's governor, we're taking the oxygen out of the room. There's no allegation coming that Ms. Bartlett was telling Jay who he should vote for. That he shouldn't be, favored to Republicans or Democrats. No. She's taking care of his needs and trying to make his life better. Hope, we all know, was an AP teacher of art history at Douglas Anderson. Again, Hope's lawsuit is a little bit different than Haley's. Because Hope's been persecuted at a different level, probably because 20-year-old Haley Bartlett and something else, I would never, a little bit 21-plus-year-old Hope McMath has a history of standing for people. And again, we're going to get into it, and I'm not going to read the complaint to you, but we can get into kind of the chapters of it, right? But essentially, what we know from a 2+ hour meeting with Duval County Public Schools is the complainant in Hope's case. Are you ready for it? Raise your hand if you think it's a student. Raise your hand if you think it's another teacher. Raise your hand if you think it's her principal or vice principal. It's Moms for Liberty. The complainant in Hope's case, the reason she's sat in a room in Bulls Bay and now sitting in a different room, at least somewhat using some of her skill set, is because she spoke against the agenda for Moms for Liberty. And it is that. It is a 501c4. Meaning they can do political action. Okay? Moms for Liberty and Turning Point. Every bit of this. Every bit. But they only want their side to be spoken. Some feel that the movement of Moms for Liberty and Turning Point is white nationalist. It's clearly Christian, which, as a Christian father of 3 kids in the Duval County Public Schools, I appreciate, but not at the exclusion of every other student in Duval County Public Schools. But what happened at the school board meeting subsequent to Hope's suspension? 4 aligned, 4 endorsed, 4 who some were members of Moms for Liberty proudly wore shirts that said, "This is the turning point." while they and others spoke about how evil these women must be, the monsters that they are, and that they have a white woke agenda to start war, violence, all of that. Do you plan to start any violence? Do you plan to start any violence? We're weaponizing speech to keep some teachers out of the classroom. Meanwhile, as you see in the complaint, and we redacted the teachers' names, there's those that are on the other side that continue to teach it day after day, bring stuff into the classroom, post offensive things, but what you do in your private life, particularly as a teacher, according to, guess what, a U.S. Supreme Court case, Pickering versus Board of Education, is allowed. Mr. Pickering did the sin of speaking out about the Board of Education in an editorial. And everybody said that's going to inflame the school system, and you can't do that. He was suspended at every level until the U.S. Supreme Court said in 8-1 victory that, nope, you have the right to speak out. Now let's go back to September 11th. What happened? Charlie Kirk, unfortunately, tragically, was killed. Nobody here is celebrating saying, yay, another one died. Nobody here wants death. Charlie Kirk himself said speech must be open, it is not evil, it must be free. Charlie Kirk also warned about the violence that comes from speech that is divisive. But was Charlie Kirk's speech divisive? That depends on which side of this pendulum you're on. Objectively, what we know is Charlie Kirk said he didn't want the word Karen said because he said it was a slur word, but he was okay with using thugs. He was okay with using prowling blacks. He was okay with saying, immigration is the next Holocaust for the country. He wasn't afraid to tell woke white women they were starting war. And at some point, at all points, actually, women, educators, no matter what you do, particularly if you're in a government job, have the right to say, I don't agree. And that's what these two women did. Haley merely reposted somebody else's TikTok. That's all she did. No editorializing, no communication. What Hope did and said, it's been written about and written about and written about, but there was a comment about karma and how karma's there for all of us. And I agree with that. Because if you're on either of these extremes, you're drawing attention to yourself. And in this scary era, that is leading to more violence. But are we as a leader, are we as a country, are we stopping it? Are we saying stop the violence? Stop the rhetoric? No. We're continuing to call people monsters and engage terms that lead to more war. And so when you have school board officials wearing Turning Point t-shirts, and particularly for Ms. Carney, limiting Ms. Joyce, limiting speakers to 1 minute and 1 minute only, and cutting them off and threatening to remove them if they spoke for a minute, making them identify themselves in their addresses, but then reading a 6-minute email in the record which bolsters one side, her side, the Moms for Liberty side, the Turning Point side, that is improper use of speech. Moms for Liberty themselves, in the Brevard County case, has successfully sued for that. Duval County Public Schools has been successfully sued for speech way more offensive, but right-sided, than what was here. And we talk about that in the Thomas Cagnon section of the complaint. So, look, folks, I'm here as a lawyer, but I'm also here as a dad of 3 Duval County Public School students who are worried. as I'm traveling from, high school to high school for my 13-year-old to decide which school to go to, I'm actually looking to see, how active is your Turning Point Club? How active is your now Club USA or Club America, because they're rebranding Club? Are they just trying to get flags in the classroom, or is this part of something else? Like, we as parents, is there a counterpoint? Is there a counterpoint to it? Because what's going on in these classrooms, and it happened at a local high school just last week, where our Club America, Club America meeting was held, and people that didn't agree with Club America sat in, and the whole meeting had to be adjourned. So we're putting this energy, this negative energy, into our classrooms, into our students, and we're taking out teachers and suspending them indefinitely, and not providing the complaints, which is just it. In the law and law school, and we're in this constitutional law classes, they talk about a slippery slope and say, oh, that's slippery. You got to avoid the slippery slope. There's a slippery slope. You can slip. You can move down one way or the other. This is a cliff. And so we're slipping right off a cliff where those that are in power are allowed to put their religion, their views, their politics forefront in t-shirts. They're telling us what they're doing. And the counter message is persecuted, weaponized, etc. So this lawsuit is designed for damages and for injunctive relief, saying no more of that. Nothing about what's been going on has been content neutral. That's required in First Amendment cases. That means if I'm going to say something, far right or far left, they both have equal breadth. But if I'm going to say something far right and say, okay, let's just take these, I don't agree with these other two balls, okay? So let's just put them aside because I don't want them a part of this. So then this is what our school system becomes. Is that what we want? Because that's where we're headed. If we're just taking out teachers that don't have the same views as us. So, I address being a dad, I address being a lawyer, but as a community member, since I've gotten involved with this, and Hope and I have been working through this since September, hoping that the administrative process would get it right. It hasn't. But I've had countless teachers come up to me, and I literally mean countless, worried, wanting to leave the profession, not able to just teach. I've never had a problem in 25 years as a lawyer, and as 13 plus years, you got to count, I guess, each one of my kids' lives. If you count them separately, 30 plus years of being a dad. I'm not that long of a dad, but 13 plus 11 plus 8. I've never had an issue with a teacher over, drama in speech. Do I like the way all of them grade? Do I like the way all of them, present? But my mother was a teacher. My grandmother was a teacher. And so if we're not going to protect them and say, well, now we're going to regulate their private lives, where are we? Because we're not living by the Constitution while we say we are, and we're not giving equal breadth. And my friends, if we're going to say we're not going to allow one side to speak because we find it offensive, but meanwhile the other side is allowed, let's talk about what happens to that pendulum in a democracy. Because as soon as somebody else is elected, then your speech is an issue. And if you think you're on the right side of this, because of your Christians, because of your religion, because of your values, it's going to be weaponized against you by the same people, the same type people of a different party. We have to allow the First Amendment to breathe on all sides, or we're all going to suffocate as Americans. Hope, what do you have to add?
I think I would add to that sort of the heart of what is happening when teachers get stripped out of a classroom, right? So I've spent a lifetime as an educator, not always in a traditional classroom. I've been an educator for 30 years in medical settings, museums, universities, community spaces, and yes, for a short while in our Duval County Public Schools. And so I'm very passionate about education, teaching, and see that as a path for my own learning and my own growth as a human being. I've also always been an artist. I wasn't always an art historian, but I've always been an artist. And I got turned on to being an art historian because of a great professor, because of a great teacher. In fact, when I was a freshman in college and they told me I had to take art history, I was horrified. I was not interested in studying art. I was interested in making art. But a great teacher changed my life by exposing me to all that could be learned about the world by looking at the world's art. So those two things have been a combined passion for me for a long time. And they have come together in this role that I play at Douglas Anderson, teaching very bright, very creative students who are actually taking college level courses. But the other thing I've always been is also somebody who believes in human progress, believes in the role that we each play in creating spaces in which diversity and care and people's individual experiences can live and flourish. And so again, all that has sort of come to bear on my role at Douglas Anderson. And I have not been taken out of my classroom because of anything I did against students, parents, or my peers. This has been a political hit from people in the community who have no idea what happens in my classroom, don't care what happens in my classroom. And a lot of people will say, well, you're a political being, Hope. How can you actually be a teacher and not do that? Yeah, I'm a humanitarian. I'm somebody who believes in speaking truth, but I have a curriculum I follow that is actually dictated to about 1,000 teachers throughout this country that says you need to cover art history from 25,000 BCE up until 10 years ago. And here are the 250 works of art you have to cover. And that's exactly what we do. But because it is a space of curiosity, it's a space of learning, it's a space of open debate, all kinds of things about our current world come into that classroom. But I have never and would never teach about my own political views or any kind of political rhetoric within that classroom. And so a lot of people want to say I have somehow done harm. The real harm that has been done is by the people who have forced me to be taken out of that classroom. There are now 50 plus students at Douglas Anderson taking a college level course, which is extremely rigorous, fast paced, super interesting when you actually have somebody facilitating it, and they're now teaching themselves. What are the chances of them getting college credit at the end of this year? I have no idea. I know last year, 70% of my students got college credit. I would guess that number isn't going to be as strong this year. So that's where the harm has been done. The harm is being done to me, it's being done to my peers who are having to pick up the slack, and most importantly, it's being done to my students.
And if you're a parent at Douglas Anderson, or a parent particularly of an art history student, did you know that the Department of Education, Florida Department of Education, went in and interviewed your student? Did they call you? You know, they interviewed these minors, and we know this not from them because they won't provide us anything, but from other sources, including students who've told us. But again, what are we doing? And what I just heard is there's no indoctrination going on, right?
Right, and they'll want to say that it's because of my social media presence, which has been a pretty consistent presence for 10, 15, 20 years. And my social media presence is not my role as a teacher. That is Hope McMath as an individual. My students don't follow me on social media. There's an agreement made at the beginning of every year, which is an alignment with policy that tells students that they can't follow me on social media. And if I discover that they do, I have to block them. And I say that out loud in my classroom because I also don't want them to be offended by the fact that they may feel like there's some sort of severing happening in a relationship. That's actually not what's happening.
So, you know, many of the folks here, many of the folks in Jacksonville are familiar with Hope from different news stories over the years, but I think this is the first time you're going to get to meet nice Haley over here. And Haley, what do you teach? Tell the people about who you are.
So I'm a paraprofessional. I work at Oak Hill Academy. It's a center school, so we focus on students on the autism spectrum and just different needs that they, have to have. And with students with autism, you really have to build that trust, and it takes a long time. And I've been working at Oak Hill for a year. I started last year, and I built that trust. And and I'm very passionate about my students. I love getting to see them doing things that, they might not they weren't able to do the week before, basic life skills. And that was a passion for me, was just teaching these kids about life. And now I fear that trust with those students is gone because I've been taken out of my classroom setting. When there was no political or politics that were brought into the classroom with coworkers, with students. Like Hope said, my social media is not associated with work, Haley. That is who I am as a person. I don't bring that into the classroom. I'm very professional, and that's basically what I do. I have a big passion for special needs students and getting to teach them about life because it's difficult for them, and not a lot of people realize that, how difficult it is to just teach them as well about basic life skills.
So you didn't editorialize, you reshared somebody else's views on
So
TikTok.
if you guys are familiar with TikTok, you can repost things, and repost is just a button. If you agree with it, you think it's funny, just click a button, and that's exactly what I did. They were not my personal words, it was somebody else's words that I agreed with, that was brought to Duval County Public Schools as an issue, and that's why I am here. Even if it's not my speech, I agreed with it, and it wasn't during school hours, and sorry.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying not to be emotional. I think it's unfortunate what we're going through right now, how we can't speak or even show what we agree on in this time. So it's very unfortunate.
Where have you been since being pulled out of school?
I have been at the Duval County Public Schools building, right down the road. I have been there for 2 months. October 6th was my first day. I've been there every day ever since. And I have been sitting in an empty room with no windows for 7 hours a day, doing nothing. Sometimes, occasionally, I'll get a stack of papers, maybe once every 2-3 weeks, that they would like me to organize into alphabetical order, and that is it. I don't do any computer work. I don't do anything but sit in this huge room with tons of desks and chairs, no windows, and I write in my journal, maybe on my phone. There's nothing else I can do. And when I bring that up to one of the people in the investigation, I did not receive any answers. I told them that I was doing nothing and that I was actually looking for something to do, and instead I did not get an answer. I was ignored. So I'm constantly driving 45 minutes a day there and back to sit in an empty room for 7 hours. And yes, that does take a toll on your mental health, especially when you don't get to see your students who you love very, very much and have gained a year's worth of trust with.
Without getting too deep into a story, let's talk just for a second about Jay. What's your understanding of what happened to Jay, or Jay, did Jay miss class as a result of after you left?
So Jay is a student I am very close to. I've had a deep connection with this student, and anybody at my school knows how this student can be. So it's a very important connection to me. After I left, which I did talk to coworkers and we figured stuff out, but obviously I have this feeling after I left, he went away for a little bit because of something that happened, and was not at school for a very long time. A long time, a couple weeks actually, and it was right after I left. And I have not spent one day without this student. He has not spent maybe more than 2 without me. And so deep down, I felt that it was my fault that he had this happen to him, and that something was going on, and that's why he had to be taken away for so long. And it hurt me because I worked so hard with this student. I'm here for this student, and now I'm gone, and all of a sudden he's gone. So it hurts to see.
And I invite as a follow-up story for you guys to look into Bulls Bay, to look into these teachers that are you want to talk about a fiscal conservative. I was a Republican before I kind of moderated and became nothing, you know. Let's say I'm not Republican, I'm not Democrat, I'm reasonable. But before I, became reasonable, I was a Republican. And you want to talk about fiscal conservatism, right? So is it fiscally conservative to have 10, 20, 30? We don't even know how many teachers scattered around Duval County Public Schools doing nothing while there is no impending investigation, while there's no due process being exercised whatsoever. It boggles the mind because Haley's case is just flat stuck. It's not moving because I believe DCPS recognizes they got a big problem with her case. If Thomas Gaglione wasn't guilty of wrongdoing and they're going to have to pay several $100,000, what are you going to have to do when somebody just reposts something? And Hope stands on equal footing. At least people can sensationalize some of her prior posts, which is exactly what the Florida Department of Education did. They went back before she was even a teacher and said, oh, but she said this, or gave this to students, right? Even this was falsely described. But, then, and again, you got to get into the complaint. I'm not going to spend an hour walking through every paragraph. But normally, we trust our governments and our government officials and our prosecutors. But here we know with her complaint, it's Moms for Liberty that's generating it. And then we look at 4 school board members who were either members of, endorsed by, or received funding or sworn oath to Moms for Liberty. And then we look at our own Commissioner of Education who repeatedly, regularly goes onto their stage and speaks about being a Bible thumper, speaks about not using, pronouns, speaks about things that where Jesus is healing lepers. If you're trans, I guess in their world you're worse than a leper, and that's not okay morally, but from a First Amendment perspective, from a constitutional perspective, equal rights and privileges, what's going on here is disgusting. And it's unusual that I'm not just suing, like in Haley's case, DCPS said, let's figure this out. In Hope's case, yes, 4 members of the school board, the commissioner himself. The irony here is, I guess they want to extend educators' private lives into scrutiny. So from 3 p.m. to 8 a.m., 365 days a year, they're now under scrutiny. But I suspect I'm going to get a whoa, that's my First Amendment right by these people who platform Duval Dems or exercise political speech against their opponents and things that those that don't agree or those, Duval County Public Schools is 40% African American. And I just can't, I can't reconcile running around talking about prowling blacks and how many blacks kill white women with how is that not inflammatory, insightful speech? And then you're not able to speak up against it? What are we doing? But we do recognize, all three of us, that no one should die over speech, but no one should lose their careers and no children should suffer over speech either. Anything else you want to add?
Only thing I would add that I'm struck by listening to you, John, is our kids are also watching, right? I know my students and other young people that are in my life through other work that I do in the community, they're watching. They're watching to see what adults are going to do when these kind of threats are made, right? Especially if you're dealing, in my particular case, with students who are artists and writers and creative people. They're looking at what does free expression actually mean? Is it truly free? What happens when a teacher who actually stands up for who they are is ripped out of the classroom without a plan, without explanation, and without an end in sight? I mean, it's one of the reasons it's to be honest with you, uncomfortable to be sitting here thinking about suing public schools and the people who represent it. I'm a product of public schools here in Jacksonville, and I'm passionate about education in the public square. But when your hands are tied and the answers aren't coming and the threats are real, it's important that we take this step.
Yes, I have to agree with you. I am very stuck, and I did not want to reach this point, with having to sue DCPS, but unfortunately, to be able to see my students who I adore and love so much, and be able to see my coworkers who had my back since day one, I have gotten to that point, and it's unfortunate because not only am I a Duval County public school educator, but so is my mother. And so it's disappointing that I have to do this to be able to get back on the right track, to be able to see my students who were not involved in anything, who did not come up and say anything about this, nor did my coworkers have an issue. It was all outside of the school, so it's a lot to handle with all of that. But I'm looking forward to hopefully getting back in the classroom, but I am trying to look for the word. I'm not pleased that it has had to have gone this far in the situation that I have had to go through to be at this table right now, to be back in the classroom.
Nor am I, nor am I. This isn't a lawsuit that I relish in. In fact, we've been working on it since September. And I just hope there would be some voice of reason, someone to say, okay, wait, yeah, we might have overreacted, but instead they're doubling down. And my whole thing, and this is my last thing, y'all can ask questions, is there's people that are going to watch this that think they've made up their minds, right? They made up their minds about hope long ago. They saw Haley's presentation. They're like, wow, she shouldn't have said that. She shouldn't have reposted that. There will come a time when, and now I've got it so twisted, there will come a time when your speech is next. And that pendulum has to be able to swing. And boy, were you okay with it swinging when it was, about Biden or Obama. You needed it to be able to swing. It protected you. And now it's back on the other side, and I just want you to take a moment, read my complaint, or read Thomas Caglione versus Duval County Public Schools. If you think you know the law, if you think you know what's going to happen here, take a moment and read Thomas Caglione versus Duval County Public Schools and see how much of an attorney fee award Thomas Caglione and his lawyers were going to pay. Because we become hourly. I have become an hourly issue for Duval County Public Schools. I will take it to the U.S. Supreme Court. I have one of the largest verdicts. I have the largest jury award against a sitting president or president when we had to deal with speech in the White House. This is a little bit easier than that case. But we're going to donate a portion of attorney's fees back to First Amendment funds, back to kids. I don't relish this, but it is a must because we can't continue to take away speech rights from educators and keep them out of the classroom just because we don't like what they did in their private time. Questions?
So, working in the media, obviously, our companies have social media policies. If I were to post anything even close to, some of these other things, I would be without a job immediately and presumably have no legal recourse. How do you see this being different? I mean, the district has a social media policy. They seem to be relying on the, they're not saying that it was because of the political viewpoint, but rather it was, an endorsement of violence or whatever. So how do you reconcile that?
Pickering versus Board of Education. U.S. Supreme Court said if you're in a public school job, a government job, they can't censor political speech. If you're in private employment, which we can get into who's buying up news organizations is a whole different issue, and that could arise to the level of speech problems, but because there is an obligation on media to tell both sides, and that's a whole different story. But I just invite those folks, and the comments will be filled with, I couldn't say this at my job. You're not a public employee. And public employees, the counter to this is, okay, then, and again, this isn't a complaint made by a student, but they're saying she's unfit in the classroom because of assumption, right? A political hit job. And so, the assumption, and we went through it, and I found 2 teachers that we had named until yesterday, until Friday, and we all agreed to take their names out. Y'all can find them if you want to find them, but that's on y'all. But there were teachers with far right speech that are getting away with it, that are doing things worse. And that's where it's a big no-no, because it's not content neutral. And so I get comparing this to the private sector, but under the Florida Supreme Court, and again, I wish every single citizen of Duval would read Thomas Caglione's case, because you're gonna be like wanting to vomit at some of the things he did and said. I don't agree with him at all. And they came down and said, absolutely protect him, and reinstated him and awarded him 6-figure attorney's fees. And so, otherwise, here's where I'm talking about a cliff. All I have to do as a parent, or all I have to do is establish People Against Turning Point, 501c4. Now let's go through Duval County Public Schools Facebook page, teachers' Facebook pages, and anything I don't like, anything referencing Jesus, anything reposting, anything involving Obama, anything involving any major political issue, now I have a problem with because it could affect my children. And then those teachers are gone too. And so we've got 100 teachers sitting at the gulag, sitting at Bull's Bay on paid leave. That's not the answer. That doesn't help the school system. That doesn't help our schools that are trying to get A grades, right? So while I get the point, it's completely different when it's in the public sector. And her boss, or her boss's boss, or her boss's boss are school board members. Is a superintendent appointed by school board members? Is a Department of Education? That's who holds her license. And they're coming for it because she tweeted something. And so it's completely different. And it's also viciously hypocritical because they can take Moms for Liberty stage and say the opposite and demean, defame, debase trans people, immigrants, African Americans, anything they want, and say it's because I'm a Christian. Can you though? Because then they should be up for the same type of penalty. Right?
And in regards to Haley's case, I know you said simply she was suspended for reposting a TikTok video. Can you just clarify what the TikTok video entailed? And also she mentioned she was been sitting in an empty room since October 6th. Was she given any other alternative, or was that the only repercussion that she was given?
That was the only one. That was where I was originally sent to. They sent me there right away. There was no Bulls Bay. It was straight Duval County Public Schools. And the repost was nothing to it harms words hurt Charlie Kirk. It was just that there are bigger issues than his death, in that I did not agree with almost anything that he said, but I didn't agree that he should have died that way. But the point was that I did not agree with the man, and that there are other issues. So.
And then my follow-up question for both you all: how has this affected you career-wise and as well as your family in general?
I, like Haley, am still doing teacher jail. I was originally assigned to Bulls Bay, and I think I was there for 4 or 5 weeks, and it was pretty awful. It was humiliating and very depressing. Fortunately, I resigned to the Art Resource Center because of an administrator within the school system who recognized that that was a complete waste of skills and expertise, and so they've got me sort of working there for my hours. It affects my other work because I have lots of work. I have my own organization. I consult and work with other institutions. I've had to institute safety protocols at my business that I certainly never would have dreamed needing to do. I have to scrub other companies and organizations that I work for from my sort of public dialogue, just until this, with their hope that just blows over, that this gets resolved. So it's certainly frustrating, but again, my greatest hope is to be back in the classroom, but the ripple effects, they're real.
Yeah.
They're real.
Yeah, mine's very similar. My mental health has gone down dramatically. I mean, you can imagine having to sit in an empty room with no windows for 7 hours every day for 2 months. That'll do something to you. And not only has it affected me, but it has affected my coworkers severely. I constantly get messages, when are you coming back? We need the help, and I'm like, I don't know anything. They don't tell me anything. And it's draining. It's very depressing and draining. You have nothing to do. I mean, I've probably watched every single movie out there from all the time that I've been sitting in this room. But yes, it's definitely affected my mental health a ton, and a lot of people around me. This has not just affected me, but more people than you think. Not just my coworkers, but my students. Like I said, my students, they need that trust. They trusted me to be there every day, and then all of a sudden I'm gone. So it's also very hard for them, because now they're probably not used to me being there. And then I possibly will come back, and then I have to regain that trust. So it's a hard situation to think about, and it's very emotional.
The only other thing I want to add too is, as an artist, right, and somebody who supports other artists and spends a lot of time working with a lot of younger artists, like this issue of free expression is super, super serious for me. It's like, it's not just like my speech is the way most people think about speech being limited, it's also limiting my work as an artist, right? And I know that every time I produce a work of art now, or put on it, or curate an exhibition with certain themes and ideas in there, that it is a target, and that everybody associated with that project right now becomes a target, right? And so, and when I say target, like that's for real. Like those threats are for real, not just to people like me and Haley, but to the people around us, right? So, yeah.
And what happens when the other side catches up, right? What happens if there's malicious people with an agenda to stifle the other side of speech? Because they can. They have to enforce it if it's content neutral. And it's one of the reasons we put those examples in the complaint, like, okay, now deal with this too. Because it's not being dealt with fairly, it's not being dealt with content neutral. And again, I don't want to be, like, I could have gone through the DCPS, it's searchable. I can look up any teacher employed by DCPS, anybody can, and then cross-reference Instagram and Facebook, and you're gonna see some crazy stuff. You're also gonna see some amazing stuff. Stuff that'll make you cry. Stuff that will go from back and forth. You'll have, and I'm thinking of a particular educator, just the love that she has for her children, and then an expression of being sick and tired of people yelling and the impact it has on her children. And if that's partisan enough, then she can be suspended, not told why, not told what, not told for how long. Just sit there, day after day, just sit there. And I don't even know, I've talked to 3 or 4 different teachers in 3 or 4 different places. And most are in Bulls Bay. There's a picture, so again, I want y'all to get real familiar with Thomas Caggiano. But there's a picture that somebody sent me of Thomas Caggiano. I don't know why, I'm sorry, Mr. Caggiano. Sleeping in Bulls Bay. While as a taxpayer, I'm like, ooh, I don't like teachers doing nothing and getting income. They're not told to do anything else. They're in limbo. Purgatory, probably a better word. And you know, when the person took the picture of Thomas, they were co-surveying, and they didn't know this would be the person who, you know, rewrote DCPS First Amendment social media law at the time, because it hadn't happened yet. But they were just like, wow, this is what we're doing now. And it's just, we can't go on like this. But one of the public requests that maybe you guys will get an answer to that I didn't is who all is being kept? How much money are we spending? Hundreds of thousands of dollars a year for people just to sit in a warehouse because there's a possible investigation that's not moving. At least Ms. McMath's investigation has moved to an administrative level. It's a whole different story behind that. This part is just sitting there, literally. Next question.
So, I want to try to be real clear about this.
Yeah.
So, in Ms. McMath's case, is there a formal filing of paperwork at the state level that would challenge your teaching certificate?
Yes.
There is.
Yes.
Okay. And where is that in the process?
They want a final hearing in February.
February.
we've never been provided with this, in the complaint, there's an attachment that answers a lot of these questions.
Good.
And that instituted this, but essentially, it's a story repost that had a caricature of Trump. It's what they call a booklet, which was really a print of Art is Trans that predated her employment with DCPS, correct? And then the Charlie Kirk post that are cited in that. I've responded, that response should be available on the portal. There's an so you got CORE, right? You got PACER, you're all familiar with that. But there's an administrative law portal where you can look up the cases that are essentially before an administrative law judge.
So this is on, if I go to the Duval website, I will find
Yes.
this. Okay,
Yes.
okay. That's helpful, because I'm looking there, I see that DOE has this page for checking your certification, and click on that, and first thing it says, well, give me some ID number. Well, obviously, I'm not a teacher, I don't have an ID number.
Right.
So, but there is a way to check that.
Yeah, for a long time, we didn't know what the complaint was from the state. It sat very quiet and very mysterious for a good time. And then we finally were served what that complaint was, and I think the hearing was only set like 2 weeks ago or something like that. So.
And it for those that don't follow this stuff, it's interesting to look at the procedural history of Thomas Cagliano's case, in that he was suspended. He then, pending the suspension, either DCPS, DOE, or both, escalated to a full hearing. He had his hearing, an administrative law judge said, we're gonna uphold the suspension. He appealed that to the state court. The state court came back and said, absolutely not, reverse, remand, give him back pay, all the things. And then he fought a separate federal lawsuit that was resolved, settled. So his has taken kind of a posture that we would take. We're hoping to head off some of the state administrative law stuff, because it's like, well, wait, how can, her complaint was instituted by the commissioner of the Department of Education, who, again, and her complaint is solely, that we know of, based upon a complaint by 501c4 Moms for Liberty. And the commissioner has taken the stage at Moms for Liberty's National Convention and said that he agrees with everything that Moms for Liberty stands for, and he calls them great friends. And so if that were Melissa Nelson, right, prosecuting somebody for the same thing that she's aligned with, I would probably move for recusal. And so part of this is like asking the federal judge, like, wait, so I have 4 members of the school board and a Department of Education commissioner that are supposed to decide this, and they're literally, the old expression, I'm wearing the t-shirt. They're literally wearing the t-shirt as the antithesis of her speech. And so it's like, federal judge, can we bring some sanity to this? Because if they're able to just continue to push their way through, then there is no justice, and the conflict wins, and speech is so stifled where whereas in the media or in the private sector, they can find a different employee. Here, and you can certainly sue if it's retaliatory. And I'm going to add one more thing, because why not? It's very brave being the whistleblower here too, because they didn't have to do this. We could have just been quiet, but there are other teachers who are in similar situations, and they're watching, and we want to tell you you're okay. We're going to fight for you too. I at a point during the interview, the very good interview, result, but very, very collaborative interview we had with DCPS. One of the investigators asked if she'd remove the post, and it's like, like they're asking you to suppress your own speech so there's not a problem for them, and this just goes away. But that violates the First Amendment. Like, they're not even supposed to ask that. And again, right after Charlie Kirk was killed, I did a post myself. I was like, y'all be careful, because what you say is gonna be platformed and used. And there's a website, Charlie Kirk's Murderers, where, and there's another case that we're filing about this that's separate from educators, but his name was posted to Charlie Kirk's Murderers, and they don't know if theirs were because it came down. But I believe both of these ladies, I think September 11th was a Thursday, and Charlie was killed in the early afternoon. I don't think you were there in Utah. I think you were probably in school. I know you were.
I was at Yamaha.
Yeah. And so I don't, but that's the rhetoric that they have to deal with because they're being doxxed. And we just, and our city council did it. We're in unsafe space, and the First Amendment is being, absolutely trampled and abused.
John, it's maybe a bit of a philosophical question, but do you believe there's anything that a teacher could post that would justify their termination?
Yes.
What would that be?
I think if you, and it's not philosophical at all. It's spelled out in the Constitution. It's spelled out certainly in the cases that have interpreted the Constitution. Pickering is a person who wrote an editorial. But they say if you're there's another case where somebody was releasing secrets, releasing financial information. No, you can't do that. If you were truly advocating for harm, if you're committing crimes, anything that's not political speech, this is classic political speech. I mean, look, not to bring it up, but Omarosa said, "Not my circus, not my monkeys." Omarosa said, "I wouldn't vote for Trump again." Omarosa also said some things that were a little further out there, and they went after her for years, and we got a $1.4 million attorney fee award after it was all said and done. And there were no longer, and it's not just my effort, there were many people fighting, but there were no longer NDAs allowed in the White House context. Sure, but the same, to go back to your philosophical question, can you release confidential information, top secret? Absolutely not, you can't. There are lines, but political speech has always been protected. And, while some can easily argue anything remotely not honoring the deceased, I do wrongful death work. I wouldn't want anybody, saying something nasty after one of my clients died. It happens all the time. But Charlie Kirk was just different in the way that he was being honored and memorialized and taken out of context to some, right? To a lot. People are allowed to say, hold on, I don't agree, let's put it in proper context. And again, the complaint goes into some of that context. But this is way bigger than Charlie Kirk. And so, and not meant in any way to continue to deal with Charlie Kirk, but yet his name was uttered at the school board meeting every time because it's easy to make it bad because he died. But yeah, there's complete lines. And in fact, I think there's some stuff that was said in the classroom with one of the other teachers, but I protect, if somebody who said the same things about, and there were some awful things said about Kamala Harris, awful, similar, and if a teacher said them, or, all the things about Obama, all the things, they can join similar lawsuits with me if they were fired. But they've already won that lawsuit. Thomas Cagliani won that lawsuit.
You know, the other thing I wanna say, for however meaningful it might be, you know, the material that is cited in the complaint against me at the state, we don't know what that material is locally because they won't share the complaint. But we were shown material evidence at my hearing with our investigators locally at DCPS. You know, some of those are specifically because I have said things like transgender lives matter, right? So we can't, I think we have to be careful not to fool ourselves that this is simply a Charlie Kirk issue or a political issue. It is bigger than that from a content standpoint. You know, if they just wanted to go for political speech that, you know, where I say I don't like our current president, there's tons of that out there, but that isn't what they went for.
No, and you just have to look at what agents of Moms for Liberty are saying to realize that this isn't just, you know, Charlie Kirk. They're going after anybody that is not aligned with their core beliefs. And again, that's the issue. And they're also very proud of it because Moms for Liberty Brevard won simply because equal time wasn't given at school board meetings, which is a part of our case. This is a case for injunctive relief, but Moms for Liberty Brevard, and I copied portions of their complaint so that I made sure they just saw that we're doing the same thing they did. Because reading a 6-minute email giving unequal time and not having that person's name as a part of the record that bashes Hope McMahon, but not giving equal time and closing the meeting down, that's the Moms for Liberty Brevard case, which they won and got 6 figures in attorney's fees too. So, you know, we have a prevailing party case here. Again, my hope is that everybody finds reasonableness overnight, but never in 25 years has that happened.
I was gonna say, they come to interview tomorrow, say your jobs are back, is that enough, or is there a broader message that?
For me, yeah, I would love to get back into the workspace. I will do anything. This, in the best case, best and worst case, we just, after this, you know, gets public, they just send us back to work. I mean, I'll be frustrated, of course, because it had to take us being on the news to get back to work, but I will still obviously be very happy being back with my students and my coworkers.
For me, I definitely want to be back in my classroom. Like, that for me is issue number one, but I also think this is a bigger issue. For me, I feel like I'm sitting here not just for Hope McMath, part-time AP art history teacher at Nicholas Anderson, but for all our teachers out there, and for people who just uphold freedom of expression as a pillar for our democracy and how we function as members of a complicated, messy human family. And so I would like it to be a both and, that I am back in the classroom and we take on sort of the force that has become Moms for Liberty and the way that that has injected itself into the public education square at the state level and the local level.
May I clarify? Your Facebook post that was posted the following day on the morning of the 11th, because he was shot on the 10th, did not mention his name, nor did it even mention he, him, correct?
Correct. So my post the next day stated a very well-used phrase about karma. Since we've got news cameras, I guess I can't curse.
Ah, yeah. Karma is a B.
Karma is a B. And then it went on to say, when we put negativity and we are cruel out into the world, we can expect for that to come back on us.
And that was the catalyst to all of this retroactive social media presence you had. That
Correct.
was then notified to DCPS.
Well, partially correct. So that post happened, there was lots of discussion under my post, which I actually reread this morning in preparation for today, because I hadn't looked at it since then. And it was interesting, because there was a dialogue between people who found what I said offensive, and it gave me an opportunity to explain. I didn't ask for the man to be shot, but I do have deep disagreement with who he was. And history does tell us, you know, when you put harm out into the world, unfortunately harm will often come back. Just as when we put deep love out into the world, that is what comes back, right? So you can, and that's all still out on my Facebook page. I didn't hide any of that. But it was within one day of that, a report had been made to the school system. I was called into my principal's office, we had a conversation, there was no discipline at that point, he said, just want you to be aware. But 3 days later, I was asked to report directly to the investigator's office, and after that, I was reassigned to Bulls Bay. Then there was a scouring of my social media, which is always an interesting ride. And again, we do not know what the formal complaint is from Duval County Public Schools, but what we were shown by the investigators and has been reported in the media somehow is that it was approximately, give or take, 20 social media posts that ranged from posts that really spoke about the truth in Black history, the history of lynching in this country, supporting transgender individuals.
Who you were friends with.
Who I'm friends with. I mean, it was a full, I was like, well, if these are what is part of the complaint, it's a complaint against who Hope McMath is, and it is absolutely diametrically opposed to the agenda of Moms for Liberty. Like, it became really clear what was happening, at least for me it did.
And the complaint that we think that was made is attached to the complaint. That came from Ben Becker, who reposted it. We've never been able to get that from anybody else. We assume Ben got it directly from a infrared source, which he's entitled to protect. But you know, again, I've got two educators sitting in the dark, and we're going to try to bring light to that.
John, the DCPS discipline process is typically procedurally separate from the state process, and usually would get there because the district has referred it to the state for further processing. So typically you'd see more time between the two investigations. Do you have any clarity first on where the DCPS investigation stands, and then secondly on how it reached the state?
You clean up after I start. No, so I get a call from a client, right? This time a client, longtime friend, says, I think I'm being investigated. How do you know? Well, DCPS wants me to talk to an investigator. Well, hold on, let's figure this out. So all we knew initially was that this was DCPS generated, right? But at the same time, you had a commissioner peacocking over the Clay County case that's similarly, similar words-ish. I think she went a little further. But, you know, he does the press conference, and my understanding is this was tracking through DCPS. We had a 2-hour meeting with them. It was very collaborative. It was recorded, so it should be available depending on the pending investigation. But it was what I would call a good meeting. And then the can kept getting kicked down the road. And I even asked at a point, is this can getting kicked under a rug or down the road because you're waiting to see what DOE does? No, ours is independent, but it really isn't. And so you're going to go through the same administrative court process, and then we knew that the investigators, or whatever you want to call them, that came into Douglas Anderson were identified as state. And then when we asked DCPS about it, they're like, what do you know about that? And so I believe, even though in an investigation they don't have to tell you the truth, I believe they would tell them the truth, and they didn't know about that. And so it was like a race to the bottom here, where it seems like DCPS, and I've heard rumblings, including from a school board member, that they're very aware of the precedent in Mr. Caggiano's case, and understand that this is a problem. They'll just be outvoted on that. And so it didn't generate from DCPS, and all we have from DOE is I attach it to the complaint, essentially the letter from the commissioner saying, I find you violating social media policy and state regs because of these few areas, which tracks the Moms for Liberty complaint that again we have leaked to us, and you know it's another reason why also we sued Moms for Liberty. I don't even know when you have, and I'm going to say it, bedfellows like these, where people are, so there was another case where Moms for Liberty got called to the carpet because one of these Let's Regulate Teachers laws came out and they offered bounties, I discussed it in the complaint, bounties for anybody that found a teacher talking about critical race theory or whatever the issue was. And they wanted students and parents to whistleblow, and they gave them money so that they had witnesses to then go after that teacher. I know they've used that in the past. I don't know if that's the same here, but you got to follow the money too. There's donations. There is value, extreme value actually in this area of speaking to these groups from their stage that the commissioner has received repeatedly. Secondary gain is what's called my world. But they're also exposing themselves to voting families, right, in the crowd. And they're giving them the lines they want and saying they're friends with your friends. And then they're going to the hallway after, which the commissioner just got called out on last week, you know, and having further conversations. And at some point, I just want to be able to trust our government. And that again is the difference in the private sector, that we don't have, you know, the right to know what's going on. And here we do, they're just saying nothing to see here. And it puts me in a weird spot as a former Republican Christian white male who has assets to say, wait, we're the problem, you know, we're stifling speech, we're prosecuting those not like us, because I don't want my boys to grow up in a world of people that have just my voice. Add to that.
I do want to add with the question about the local investigation. So our understanding was that the local investigative work was finished, wrapped up, the report written, and sent up the food chain as part of whatever their normal process is. We were informed of that about 6 weeks ago. So we have regularly asked, I have regularly asked,
Right.
and included John in that, like, what is the update? Why is this sitting? And it's hard to not reach the conclusion that the reason it's sitting is because they're waiting to see what happens at the state level. Knowing that if I got reinstated to the classroom, let's say the report says, send her back to the classroom, but because I'm still under state investigation with a hearing that's not gonna happen until February, that the state could then come and pull me back out of the classroom. And because the state is waiting until end of February to do that, they have like 90 days, I think, after that hearing to make a determination and a disciplinary action. That would put us in May. My kids will have already taken their AP Art History test. They will have spent the entire year with a sub in the classroom that's doing nothing but taking attendance. They would be teaching themselves as 16-year-olds a college level course. And I'm sitting in teacher jail.
But, and excuse my poor diagram, but it goes from her case to this school board right here, four of the members which wore Turning Point t-shirts, which I get the explanation that it had something to do with cancer, but it was Turning Point. It was used their marks. They spoke, the ones that spoke, used their language. They've reposted their agendas. They've received their money. They've taken their oaths. And then that appeal would ultimately go up to the Moms for Liberty stage savvy, commissioner. And so I want some federal judge to let me know who I have to, is there a way around that process? Because the problem is if you disqualify the 4 Moms for Liberty school board members, you don't have a quorum. So we have a crisis from a constitutional perspective or a state law perspective, because who's gonna make the decision here if there's a determination that there is some level of bias or conflict of interest? Yes.
I'm sorry, we gotta go.
Yes.
Do you have any brief
Sorry.
final thoughts? We gotta get this on today.
Yeah, sorry. I mean, you've got it. Your people have enough to cut.
All right, good.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah.
Thank y'all for your time.
I didn't expect an hour and a half. I didn't either.
Okay.
Yeah.